Greetings, seekers of wisdom. Welcome to Mythos Unveiled, where we traverse the labyrinthine corridors of ancient tales, not merely to recount them, but to unravel the threads of meaning hidden within. Today, we delve into the story of Medusa, a name synonymous with monstrosity, yet one that whispers of betrayal, metamorphosis, and the fragile line between divinity and despair. Sit with me, fellow wanderers, as we peer into the mirror of her myth, reflecting not just her face, but our own. The priestess, a life unfurled in sacred shadows. Long before snakes crowned her head, Medusa was mortal. This, few remember. In the earliest whispers of her story, she was a priestess of Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, her beauty rivaling the dawn. Her voice carried prayers like hymns, her presence a testament to devotion. Yet here lies the first paradox. How often do we conflate beauty with virtue, or ugliness with sin? Medusa's temple was no ordinary sanctuary. It stood at the edge of the sea in ancient Libya, a land steeped in matriarchal power, where women ruled as warriors and oracles. Some scholars suggest this detail, often erased, hints at a deeper truth. Medusa may have been a vestige of an older, pre-Olympian goddess, her visage later demonized by patriarchal mythmakers. But let us not leap ahead. For now, she is young, radiant, and devout. Her hair, said to ripple like dark waves, became her pride, a symbol of her sacred vow. Athena, ever the strategist, valued order above all. Medusa's purity was not just spiritual, it was a covenant. The violation, when gods played chess with mortals. The storm arrived in the form of Poseidon, god of the sea, whose tempers mirrored his tides. Desire, for the Olympians, was less an emotion than a weapon. He pursued Medusa, not through love, but entitlement. She fled to Athena's temple, seeking refuge in the shadow of her goddess's shield. What happened next is etched in ambiguity. Some say Poseidon overpowered her. Others claim Medusa, flattered by a god's attention, succumbed willingly, a narrative perpetuated by those who blame victims to absolve power. But consider this. In the oldest versions of the myth, there is no Athena's curse. Medusa and her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, were born Gorgons, monstrous daughters of primordial sea deities. The curse was a later invention by the Roman poet Ovid, a rebel who used myth to critique authority. His Medusa is a tragic figure, punished for another's crime. Athena's wrath, whether justified or cruelly misplaced, transformed Medusa. Her hair became vipers. Her gaze turned flesh to stone. Exiled to a desolate island, she became both predator and prisoner. Yet here, the myth splits again. Was her power a curse or a gift? The Gorgon, a symphony of silence and screams. Medusa's new existence defied simple monstrosity. Her sisters, immortal and loyal, stayed by her side, a kinship rarely highlighted. Together, they were a triad of terror, yet also of protection. The Gorgonian, Medusa's likeness, adorned Athena's shield and temple walls, warding off evil. How curious. The goddess who cursed, her weaponized her image. What does this say about fear as a tool of control? On her island, Medusa's gaze became a language. Those who sought her head, warriors, glory seekers, were silenced mid-sentence, their ambitions fossilized. But perhaps her true tragedy was loneliness. To be seen was to die. To love was impossible. Even her tears, it said, birthed coral snakes, as though her sorrow itself was venomous. And then came Perseus, the golden boy of prophecy, armed with divine favors, Athena's shield, Hermes' wings, Hades' helm of invisibility. His quest was less heroism than PR, a means to escape his tyrant grandfather. Medusa, pregnant with Poseidon's children, slept when he struck. Or did she? Some fragments suggest she allowed her demise, weary of eternal exile. The aftermath, blood, wings, and unlikely rebirth. From her severed neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the giant with a golden sword, symbols of creativity and violence born from trauma. Medusa's head, still potent, became Perseus' weapon, petrifying foes until Athena reclaimed it for her shield. Even in death, Medusa's power was co-opted by the gods, but the blood that dripped from her veins held magic. A single drop could spawn serpents or revive the dead. depending on which vial it filled. Asclepius, god of healing, used it to cure plagues, a duality often ignored. Monstrous yet medicinal, destructive yet life-giving. Medusa, like all myths, refused simplicity. The legacy mirrors feminism and the gaze. Reclaimed. For centuries, Medusa was reduced to a cautionary tale, beware the monstrous woman. But modern eyes re-examine her. To Freud, she symbolized castration anxiety. To feminists, a victim of gaslighting and slut-shaming. Her visage, once a tool of terror, now adorns shields of marginalized communities, reclaiming the narrative. Less known is her connection to Libyan Amazons, who allegedly used her blood in rituals. Or that in Etruscan art, she's depicted with a benevolent smile, guarding tombs as a psychopomp. Even her monstrous form may symbolize the primal other, the untamed wildness society fears yet craves. Epilogue. What do we see in her eyes? Medusa's story is a mirror. Do we see a monster, a victim, or a goddess stripped of her throne? Her tale asks, who gets to define monstrosity? The gods? The poets? Or those willing to gaze beyond the surface? The sisters, Stheno, Euryale, and the forgotten bonds of blood. Medusa's story cannot be told without her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, immortal gorgons whose narratives are often eclipsed by hers. While Medusa was mortal, her sisters were born as primordial forces, daughters of Phorcys and Ceto, ancient sea deities representing the hidden horrors of the deep. Their very existence blurred the line between monster and divinity. Stheno, whose name means the mighty, was said to roar with the fury of storms, her claws sharper than any blade. Euryale, the far-roaming, possessed a shriek that could shatter stone, a sound echoing the loneliness of eternal life. Together, the trio formed a trinity of primal power, guardians of thresholds between worlds. When Medusa was cursed, her sisters did not abandon her. They followed her into exile, their loyalty a silent rebellion against the gods who had shattered their kin. In some traditions, Stheno and Euryale's grief transformed them. They became avatars of vengeance, hunting those who sought to exploit Medusa's tragedy. Yet even their immortality bore a curse. They could not die, but neither could they heal. Their wails for Medusa's lost humanity still haunt the edges of myths, a reminder that even monsters mourn. The birth of Pegasus, a paradox of creation and destruction. When Perseus severed Medusa's head, her blood spilled onto the barren earth of her island, and from it sprang two beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the warrior giant. These offspring are rarely examined beyond their symbolic ties to heroism, but their origins hold darker truths. Pegasus, later tamed by Bellerophon, became a symbol of poetic inspiration, yet his birth was drenched in violence. Chrysaor, whose name means golden sword, fathered the three-bodied giant Geryon, a figure slain by Heracles. Medusa's children, like her, were destined to be both revered and destroyed by heroes. But what does it mean that beauty, Pegasus, and brutality, Chrysaor, emerged from the same act of violence? In esoteric traditions, Pegasus' wings are seen as a metaphor for transcendence, rising above trauma. Yet Medusa never had that chance. Her children's fates amplify her tragedy, even in rebirth. Her legacy was co-opted by the very forces that destroyed her. The Libyan connection, Medusa as a dethroned goddess. Few know that Medusa's roots may lie in North Africa. In ancient Libyan lore, she was not a monster but a goddess of sovereignty. Her serpent crown symbolizing wisdom and regenerative power. The Berbers worshipped her as a protector of queens, and her visage was carved into amulets to ward off evil. This aligns with her temple's location in Libya, as described by early Greek historians. Some scholars argue that Medusa's myth evolved from the syncretism of Greek colonists clashing with indigenous cultures. The Gorgon's face, with its wild eyes and lolling tongue, resembles ancient Mesopotamian demons like Humbaba, suggesting a cross-cultural archetype of the terrible guardian. Athena's appropriation of Medusa's image might thus reflect a colonial erasure, transforming a once revered deity into a vanquished foe. Even her petrifying gaze may have origins in practical magic. Libyan priestesses used polished shields, similar to Perseus' mirror, in rituals to repel curses. implying Medusa's gaze was originally a protective ritual inverted by Greek myth. Medusa in the underworld, a psychopomp's whisper. In Etruscan art, Medusa is depicted not as a monster but as a guide for souls. Her face adorns tombs, her wide eyes staring into the afterlife. This role as psychopomp, a conductor of the dead, hints at a kinder aspect. Her gaze, which petrified the living, may have offered solace to the departed, freezing them in a moment of peace before rebirth. This duality is echoed in her blood. While the right side of her body produced venomous serpents, the left side held healing elixirs. Asclepius, the god of medicine, used her blood to resurrect the dead, an act so disruptive that Zeus slew him with a thunderbolt. Medusa's essence, like her story, defies binaries, life and death, poison and cure, monster and saint. The feminist reclamation, from victim to vanguard. In 1978, poet May Sarton wrote, Medusa was a beautiful woman who dared to claim equality with Athena. Modern feminism has reclaimed her as an icon of rage against patriarchal violence. #MeToo activists brandish her image, transforming her snarl into a rallying cry. But lesser known is her role in queer iconography. Medusa's severed head, with its wild hair and defiant stare, resonates with those ostracized for their monstrous identities. Her inability to be gazed upon mirrors the experience of marginalized groups, forced to hide their true selves. Yet when she chooses to meet a viewer's eyes, as in contemporary art, she becomes a symbol of empowerment, reclaiming agency over her narrative. The psychological labyrinth, Medusa as a mirror of the mind. Freud famously interpreted Medusa's head as a symbol of castration anxiety, reducing her to a male fear of female power. But Jungian scholars offer a richer reading. She represents the shadow, the repressed parts of the psyche we dare not confront. To face Medusa is to face our own capacity for rage, desire, and transformation. Her stone gaze parallels modern struggles with trauma, how pain can freeze us in time, turning living hearts into monuments of memory. Yet her myth also hints at liberation. To be petrified is not always to be defeated. Sometimes it is to become unbreakable. Medusa's silent sisters, global echoes of the Gorgon. Medusa's archetype reverberates beyond Greece. In Hindu mythology, Kali's lolling tongue and necklace of skulls parallel Medusa's terrifying visage, both embodying the destructive creative force of the divine feminine. In Japan, the Gorgon finds a counterpart in the Yukiana, a spectral woman whose gaze freezes victims in snow. Even in Christianity, Medusa's influence lingers. The basilisk, a serpentine creature whose gaze kills, echoes her power. Some medieval alchemists encoded her image in treatises as a symbol of transformation. The ultimate philosopher's stone. The unanswered question, was Medusa ever truly cursed? Return to Ovid's version, where Medusa is punished for Poseidon's crime. But in older texts, she was always a Gorgon. This raises a haunting possibility. Perhaps Athena did not curse her, but revealed her true nature. What if Medusa's transformation was not a punishment, but an awakening? Consider the Gorgon's traits: snakes, rebirth; stone, endurance; and wings, freedom. These are not marks of a monster, but of a goddess stripped of her throne. Medusa's curse may have been her apotheosis, a forced ascension to a role the Olympians feared. Finale, the eternal gaze. Medusa's tale ends where it begins, in a loop of interpretation. She is both victim and victor, destroyer and healer, mortal and myth. Her eyes, which once turned men to stone, now challenge us to see beyond dualities, to recognize that light cannot exist without shadow. Engage with the mythos. If this journey through Medusa's many faces has captivated you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into mythology's hidden corners. And let us know in the comments, which archetype speaks to your soul? The resilience of warriors, the cunning of tricksters, the tragedy of monsters, or the grace of gods? Parting wisdom, fellow wanderers. Every myth is a mirror. What we vilify often holds the key to our salvation. Stay curious, for even monsters have lessons to teach. Farewell and reflect.